Good morning. Good morning. Um, Today we're going to talk a bit about sort of history of where we were, how we got to where we are, and what implications it has for communities. Um, in the early 2020s, about 2005, something like that, we had a company called Synergy, and Synergy was a fuel cell company. And we promoted a notion called TUS, that's Total Utility Services. And TUS was a waste to energy concept that included provision of water, district heat, etc. So it was in effect all of the utilities required: waste management, water production, electricity, and heat. So it was a fairly universal concept. And it was designed to meet the needs of an area of London under, at that time, um, community-based renewal in a place called Thamesmead. And we were working very closely with some of the developers, or the municipal developers, not the private developers, but the municipal developers. So we wrote a report which was fairly consistent with the need to do the same sort of thing we we wish to do again. And that report was copied by a councillor called Nikki Gavran, who actually claimed authorship of it. She just copied it and submitted it. But of course, because she wasn't capable of delivering, it never happened. And eventually Thamesmead sort of died to death, or didn't die a death, but it didn't meet the objectives that it was supposed to. So this gives us sort of an idea of what you have to be aware of. You have to be aware of being sidelined by the political establishment, and also being sidelined by competing lobbyists. Now, as it happened, Synergy went out of business. It was quite successful, but it went out of business because it was attacked by some Russians who were Putin's friends, and basically they were gangsters. And although they were sued in the US for their activities, or rather, they sued somebody in the US to try and gain some uh, intellectual property from ZTEC. I went over there and appeared in court on behalf of the defendants, who were American shareholders of ZTEC. And the Russians lost, and lost heavily. In order to try and stop me from appearing in the courts, they attacked me personally, and I sued them for basically for lying, uh, uh, for telling complete untruths. But what they would do is that wherever we went, they would hire people to hand out these scurrilous defamatory leaflets and intimidate people from not coming in, attending meetings, etc., etc. And in one case, one chap in the States actually had a heart attack and had to be taken out on a gurney wagon, which is a bit weird. The British courts, rather interestingly, in one case, because I didn't, this wasn't Synergy, this was me personally. I didn't have the money to be able to afford lawyers, so I appeared on personally myself, and normally you're supposed to be helped by the judge, but in this case, the judge actually dismissed the case on the principle that I hadn't submitted a testimony quickly enough, even though it was only a few days late. But he decided that he wanted basically get rid of the court case and get rid of me, so he found against me. But the second part, I actually won, and I won because the judge quite rightly decided that the these Russians had been lying through their teeth and found against them. But curiously, I was then sent to another judge to determine the costs in the case and also to determine the funds in for their activities. In other words, the damages. This judge took it upon himself to dismiss the case and rule against the judge whose job it was to rule on the case, saying that they weren't properly served. They had been served 7 times, but this judge was very aggressive, and but even so, I was clearly winning. The Russian's barrister tried to make a deal with me, and when he tried to make a deal, the Russians, for some reason, sacked him. So they were obviously clearly aware that there was something in it that they knew that they were going to win or get the case dismissed, which is eventually what happened. And the interesting thing was that they tried to serve me in the court for a claim, and the judge, not wanting to obviously have the case reviewed and taken a look at again because clearly something was dodgy, he told them that they had to get back within 7 days with a reason for doing this, because it's highly unethical to serve somebody in a court. They do this in the States now with these ICE guys going around and picking off illegal immigrants and sending them to San Salvador, El Salvador, which was basically what was happening in this court case. So he had to act, and he told them they had to get back in 7 days and tell them. Well, of course they didn't. They just let the whole thing drop. So, but I didn't have the funds, and I didn't have by that time the energy to counter this, and I didn't really understand what was happening anyway because I'm not a lawyer. But clearly, the barrister thought I was going to win. I thought I was going to get the proper judgment and the proper funds, etc. But that didn't happen. So you can tell what I'm trying to get at here is that there is within the UK there is a stream of corruption that starts at the very bottom and goes to the very top, that you have to take into consideration when you're doing any kind of project that might not be within the interests of the government of the time. And this is certainly the case with this, with the notion of waste to energy, because it is not pursued in any way whatsoever. But what is pursued is some very expensive and rather illogical issues in being able to produce hydrogen and use it locally. Now, give you an example. Hydrogen will now be shipped from Newcastle, or rather from the northeast, to Liverpool via a pipeline mixed with natural gas. Now, you might wonder why you're doing that. Well, it's because they've got overcapacity in the North Sea with electricity. They can't put it through the grid. So what they're doing is that they're electrolyzing water and making hydrogen and oxygen and shipping the hydrogen down via gas pipelines. Anybody who knows anything about hydrogen will tell you that hydrogen has a bad effect on most metals. It makes them very brittle. So the possibility is that pipeline will start crumbling due to being affected by the hydrogen in the gas. But in any event, it's a very bad idea and very, very expensive. It will come down to Liverpool. And if you know that there's a Freeport being built in Liverpool, they were very proud to say that they would be using hydrogen, but they don't know what to do with it. There is no legitimate fuel cell provision in the Freeport manifesto, for example, for using hydrogen. So what they're going to do with it is likely as not they're going to burn it. Silly, isn't it? So here we have resources not only in terms of waste, but also in terms of those things where they're being converted because of an overcapacity, which is bad planning. And if you if you think that it maybe sound just a wee bit dodgy, think back to what I first said. Nicky Gavran actually copied word for word what we were putting in and put it before the London Council, and of course she couldn't. There was no way they could do it. We could have done it, but they wouldn't do that. So there you have an example from the very lowest form of government all the way to the highest form of government of an intrinsically dodgy administration. Now, I'm not suggesting that the politicians are all dodgy. They're certainly not. 99.9% of politicians are pretty straightforward and pretty honest and they're public servants. They are genuinely looking after the public, but they're not advised very well, and they are advised by some very dodgy people. So the information they get, which is very slick, the lunches that they're taken out to, etc., especially the civil servants, are provided with some fairly dodgy stuff, and they don't listen to anybody else. So, and this sounds par for the course, I'm sure that you'll understand this. So the information that is being given to government is by and large fairly poor. And in my next broadcast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and look at the history of the fuel cell in the UK. Don't forget, fuel cells were invented in this country, and the first practical ones were developed in this country. Now you're going to in the next podcast, you're going to find out what happened and why we don't do it anymore.